After some hesitation, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, anthropology turned resolutely to the study of individual cultures. Researchers began to take very seriously the differences between cultures, but without renouncing the great theoretical questions that presuppose the unity of man. They believed that beyond the archaic cults, each different from the others, there was the enigma of religion as such, and that its solution must be imminent. Everyone was more or less agreed that blood sacrifice lay at the heart of this enigma. Beyond carefully descriptive essays, such as Hubert and Mause's Essay on the Nature and Function of Sacrifice, ambitious researchers dreamed of working out a definitive theory that would at last explain why, in the most diverse cultures, with the exception of the Christian and the modern world which issues from it, men have always immolated victims to their divinities. After a century of aborted attempts, in the middle of the 20th century, anthropologists began to wonder, quite legitimately, whether they were doomed to failure, by a premise implicit in their efforts, the unity of religion, which presupposes that of human culture. They wondered whether anthropology had not been the victim of Western ethnocentrism. Nothing is more praiseworthy than mistrust of ethnocentrism. How could it fail to threaten us when all modern anthropological concepts come from the West, including that of ethnocentrism, a charge that is brandished by the West alone and against itself exclusively? Mistrust of ethnocentrism is more than legitimate. It is indispensable. And yet we must not make of it the prehistoric bludgeon that false progressivism and false radicalism made of it in the second half of the 20th century. The notion of ethnocentrism was made to serve a poorly disguised anti-intellectualism that reduced to silence the most legitimate anthropological curiosity. For several years, the frenzy of deconstruction and demolition sustained an intense excitement in research that today has collapsed, killed by its own success. It is not excessive ambition that threatens us now, but bureaucratization and provincialization, as research is more and more limited to the local and the particular. Once the great questions are discredited, for want of intellectual stimulation, anthropology languishes. Still quite lively in the area of Durkheim and the early Lévi-Strauss, the discipline has since tended to settle into a rather disappointing academic routine. If it were clear that the celebrated differences are alone real, that they override resemblances and identities in every case, we would gladly resign ourselves to this situation. But the dogmatic nihilism of the last quarter century is little more than an avant-garde slogan doubling as a flagrant logical absurdity. Research is brought to heel with the intimidation post-colonialist, and this cannot last forever. No, sacrifice cannot be defined primarily as a discourse. No, Saussurian analysis cannot settle its score with religion. A science begins by flouting common sense at its own peril. We must return to the modest realism of fledgling disciplines. We must rekindle the curiosity that is the true impetus of anthropology, which is more and more intimidated by the snobbery of the void. We are the first great civilization to completely rid ourselves of sacrifice. The intense curiosity this institution inspires in us is inseparable from our singularity in this respect. It is not thereby disqualified. Classical anthropology asked the right questions. If the answers failed to come, it is not necessarily because they do not exist. It might be because we refuse to seek them where they may be found. Far from exhausting the possibilities of inquiry, anthropology, in its research on sacrifice, has always conjured away the most obviously relevant fact: violence. There exists a very old and powerful taboo against religious violence. Rather than liberating us from it, radical avant-gardism only reinforces it.